Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's Novigo Supply Chain Expert Series, where supply chain thought leaders share their insights on what is impacting supply chains today and what supply chain leaders need to do to plan for tomorrow. My name is Garrett Cry, and I'm a consulting manager with Novigo, and I'll be one of your hosts today. For those of you joining us for the first time, Novigo is a supply chain software implementation partner focused on SAP digital logistics solutions and an SAP Gold partner. I've been implementing SAP Transportation Management and the related supply chain softwares for the past 6 years, helping our shipper and LSP clients digitize and transform their supply chains and transportation processes. I'm joined today by our co-host, Volker Weber, Vice President at Novigo.
I'm Volker, Vice President for Asia Pacific region. I have been working in the SAP industry with customers in all sorts of industries for the last almost 30 years. Glad to be here. I'm looking forward to the session.
Thanks, Volker. And we're delighted to be here today with Lisa Anderson. Lisa is the founder and president of LMA Consulting Group, Inc., a consulting firm that specializes in manufacturing strategy and end-to-end supply chain transformation that maximizes the customer experience and enables profitable, scalable, dramatic business growth. She's been named in the top 46 most influential in supply chain by SAP, a top 40 B2B tech influencer by Arceti Group, and a top 50 ERP influencer by Washington Frank. She recently published Future-Proofing Manufacturing and Supply Chain Post-COVID-19, an ebook on successfully emerging and thriving post-COVID-19. Thanks, Lisa, for joining us today.
Glad to be here with you, Garrett and Volker.
Well, I'd like to share something that I think might be familiar with you all during this pandemic experience that we're living through. We picked up some different habits and things with our new time at home. And one activity that I spent more time doing during the pandemic was visiting the pot shop. Maybe not the one that you're thinking of. I am in Seattle after all, but a gardening store for gardening supplies. So you can see one of my plants that I picked up here during the pandemic recently. And in talking with the folks at the gardening supply store, they were hit by the supply chain disruption just like everyone else. And I was looking for these pots and I couldn't find them. Talking with them, the issue was due to disruption that they were facing at the port. They manufactured these overseas and they simply couldn't get from their manufacturing facilities to the port successfully and couldn't find a capacity to get them overseas and into stores for us to buy today. So anyhow, one disruption that I've experienced lately. How about you, Lisa? Anything going on that you've been unable to get?
Well, absolutely. Actually, your story reminded me of a client because they supply lawn and garden equipment. So maybe we'll bring that up later. But from a personal point of view, I really enjoy going to lunch by myself and, maybe working or, just relaxing. And every restaurant, I have a few standbys that I like to go to, and they have all reduced their selection. Of course, on the items that I like to eat. So apparently what I like to eat is not popular or something. And so one of them, though, reduced the salad dressing that I prefer to eat, but they actually, because I can't come there pretty frequently, they kept the supply for me for as long as it lasts, which has been lasting months. So I don't know how that works, but I'm glad about it. So it's definitely affected the availability of ingredients, and restaurants and food establishments have definitely scaled back and consolidated their SKUs.
Yeah, I think we've seen disruptions. I think everyone has seen disruptions everywhere. I'm based in Melbourne in Australia, and a lot of my customers are actually based here. And we've had everything from pallet shortages, no hardwood to make new pallets, to nickel price spikes impacting raw materials. We've seen it all. I'm sure everyone has their story. I think we had to adjust to some extent to the new normal. And whilst supply chains are recovering, we're not there yet, which pretty much leads us to our first question, Garrett.
Absolutely. So Lisa, as business leaders globally realize how essential it is to build a resilient supply chain, to mitigate risk of unforeseen events, what does this plan look like, and how do you advise clients around this? Could you share some best practices or lessons learned on building a resilient supply chain?
Sure. So there's a lot of steps that we could talk about for hours actually in developing a resilient supply chain, but a few of them would be cross-training your people because everyone is having challenges filling key roles and keeping folks. So if the more variety of functions that they can perform, the better you'll be. That's one option. Another is to have a backup source of supply that you can count on, which is different from one in name only. Additionally, folks are reshoring and nearshoring manufacturing to be closer to customers. They can respond quicker. They are also implementing advanced technology so that they can actually respond quicker and customize to the customer's requirements. And there's several other, we could talk for quite a while on that topic, but that gives you a couple of insights on how to create a resilient supply chain. So I think that's a good place to start.
That's great. If we narrow it down a little bit, Lisa, we had supply disruption, we had demand disruption, people couldn't leave the house, couldn't go shopping, quarantining, and so on. We are starting to recover, and COVID is basically accepted. It runs its course, and in that situation, what are the immediate challenges for manufacturers and companies in the CPG industry and any other industry to deal with these? What are they presented with, and what are they doing about it?
As far as now that we're emerging from COVID, is that what you mean?
Yes. Yes.
Well, so I definitely work with CPG companies as well as a variety of other type companies like commercial building products, that type of thing. And across the board, I'm seeing that the smarter companies or smarter people in the companies we're creating the resilient supply chain. They are proactively working with their customers and their suppliers, and not just their customers and suppliers, but their customers, their suppliers, and so on, to get a better handle on their full supply chain, implementing programs such as sales and operations planning, which is also called SIOP for sales inventory operations planning, to give them a better view of what their demand is, how they can get on top of changing conditions and make sure that they can supply it. And they're realizing that they need to invest ahead. They're proactively working on, how do I offset inflation, or how do I raise prices or prioritize customers, those types of unfortunately or fortunately, I guess I could go on with each of these questions for hours.
So with some of these companies then that you work with, how do you help them justify the ROI, or say consider the inputs here to making such an investment in terms of a change?
So you mean in any sort of change, right? So like implementing in a system or just even consultants or whatnot. Sure. Well, so, really we look at it, actually it comes down to common sense. And so many times it's just as simple as putting it in common sense terms. But the way to do that is where you say, you're going to hit a wall of growth when you get to X point, or maybe they're already there. And so if you would like to continue to grow, these are the types of activities that we'll need to do so that you can scale up, not only successfully so you can meet customer requirements, but in a way that's going to be profitable and sustainable. So generally speaking, it depends on the situation, but you're either supporting additional customer growth, you're supporting additional customer requirements, or you are supporting a return on investment idea, which might be, how do we do all of this while continuing to increase our profit levels, and we need to invest in, I don't know, XYZ. Could be people, could be processes, could be equipment, could be technology, could be a lot of things.
Yeah, you mentioned a number of things that people are doing, and some is strategic, some is operational, and it involves talking to your suppliers, and so on. So a lot of it is the network, the entire supply chain that you need to understand what your options are. To what extent do you see companies looking at technology to help them with that, to manage that entire supply chain, to get the visibility that they need to make the right decision, whether it be analytics or whether it be visibility of where's my product, when is it coming, all these kind of things that are available. Is there a strong interest? Do you see strong investment in that area?
Yes, I have. I also see that some of the more progressive clients are doing simple common sense things like picking up the phone, which doesn't require too much technology. On the other hand, they also are simultaneously implementing the right technology for their business. So many times I'm seeing investments in ERP systems. It depends on, where they stand from that point of view, or just upgrading their ERP system capabilities, which may not be that they have to do anything on the system side, but it's how do we better utilize or expand our utilization of their ERP system like SAP in order to support being able to proactively plan demand or plan production, or there's many things, warehousing, I could go on and on, but basically utilizing additional software features is extremely popular right now. And then that leads to further peripheral softwares, which are often, just more of the advanced features of software, like a WMS system or a production reporting system. The other thing that's extremely popular, probably more popular than all of that, although somewhat dependent on it, is data and analytics. So I definitely am finding an increased interest in data. Of course, that leads you down the path of it's not all about just getting information out of your system. You have to have data integrity, at least from a directional point of view, so you can make good decisions. And then really a simple BI system or report is a good place to start if you make sure that you get the right data on that report. And then as you get better at it, of course, you want to move towards predictive analytics and more advanced features. So I'm definitely seeing an interest in data as well. And then I guess the other piece here is anything that will help the client automate so that they don't need as many people to operate, because it's very hard to find people right now, which could be leading you back to how do we automate this function in the ERP system so that they can be more successful. Or it could be things like robotics, actually 3D printing, because that could be an option for not getting product, let's say, from China to the US, the extended lead times, rising gas prices, and all the other complications along the way. So they could just print one up. I mean, it's of course not that simple, but they're definitely pursuing those paths, as well as reshoring and assembling closer to the customer than anything.
Well, I'm just taking a moment there to absorb what Lisa said. She sure hit on a lot. It sounds like there are steps that companies can do today to work with their existing ERPs, and in some cases bolster the functionality that they're using today. In others, there might be niche products that can help them. Mm-hmm. In either case, it starts with a solid foundation of good data going into the system to provide for that analysis down the line. And then maybe we can take advantage of some of those tools like artificial intelligence or machine learning to give us more predictive analytics. Once
Absolutely. Well, Garrett, there's something to add to that since you brought that up, and that would be e-commerce is certainly something that we're seeing take off since the pandemic, because everyone wants items delivered to their house, and so you're now going to bunches of locations instead of just one warehouse, and so there is a significant need in e-commerce softwares and analytics surrounding those types of programs. So that's another thing I would bring up. And then artificial intelligence is kind of behind the scenes on several of these items. One would be forecasting, predictive analytics, instead of preventative maintenance, we predict maintenance on machinery and equipment, both in manufacturing and warehousing. So those are some of the examples related to what you just brought up that I'm seeing.
As we start to use technology and automation to replace some of these manual processes, what sort of skills do you advise your clients to foster within their workforce? What roles do you see maybe being replaced and others that should be created as companies utilize these new technologies?
Well, I'm definitely seeing that many clients would be fortunate to retain some of the high skilled talent they already have. Like, that's a good place to start. With that said, though, as they utilize the ERP systems further, it's gonna be to their advantage if they can bring on additional experts that have either a super user or like a business analyst type of functional role, or maybe a systems analyst. It depends on their needs. But basically those types of roles are becoming more popular. But actually, probably the most popular is more of like a data analyst. But they're hard to find. And so, there's many ways to go about this. You can outsource some of these roles. You don't have to hire them all internally. So, some of this is about speed. How do you get to the right data quickly and then supplement it and make it sustainable with internal resources? So I see them. Those are some of the roles that are coming up related to the technology arena. And then I would say the other thing that's happening is that, with the great resignation that's happening around the world, people are changing careers, they're retiring, and there's just it's the baby boomers are starting to retire as well. And so we have an exodus of, really experienced talent. They may or may not know anything about systems, but they knew a lot about the products and have a lot of inherent tribal knowledge that's extremely valuable that many companies are not valuing to the degree that they should, at least in my assessment, because they end up losing one of those people and then have to replace it with like 3 others to try to accommodate for all this, because they haven't incorporated what they were doing into the ERP systems or the processes that they're currently utilizing. And so the smarter companies are getting ahead of that train as well.
Well, that's interesting to think about, the disruption not necessarily caused by COVID or that pandemic, but just general trends in labor right now, and maybe an interesting way that how these new technologies can satisfy both problems. By starting to digitize your process, you could decrease the dependency on any particular employee in your workforce and develop that digital platform to manage those activities.
There you go. Sorry, I was just going to add to that. We've seen that in various industries. Here in Australia, it was one of the most rigid countries in terms of restricting people's movements. We're not allowing people to come in or leave even for a while. And traditionally, we had millions of backpackers. They work and travel in Australia, and they're staffing all the bars and cafes, and there were no workers. There was just no one there. Even when they reopened and ordered, takeout, or delivery, home delivery, they weren't just simply the people to deliver it. It's happened everywhere. That's not a high-tech industry, to be fair, but the impact of restricting movements of consumers or staff, workers, laborers is massive. And I'm sure every industry got hit by that.
Absolutely true. And I did definitely see that clients, even in the more non-service kind of industries, if they kept more people than maybe they needed, in quotes, during the pandemic, because they were thinking, well, let's get ahead and look at this system upgrade, or let's, like, how can we pivot our business? If they utilize them for those types of things, they are much more successful now, post-COVID, than the ones that had to start from scratch. Because it's like, as I referred to in the book that you mentioned, the Future-Proofing Manufacturing and Supply Chain, objects in motion stay in motion, and objects at rest stay at rest. So that is an absolutely true. It's a truism, because if you start from a standstill, it takes time to get everybody acquainted and going. And so, some of these, in today's world, we're changing at a rapid pace, and you have to, like, for example, in today's inflationary environment, you have to be raising prices. Obviously not too high, or you might lose customers, but you need to be keeping up, because you will miss your opportunity if you wait too long. So, you have to be fast. And that goes back to having data so that you can look at profitable customers, profitable products. You might need to prioritize, similar to how, like, unfortunately, the restaurants have prioritized all the things I like to eat out of the menu. But that's the types of things that clients are doing so that they can prioritize, their customers that are either most meaningful strategically or are most profitable.
Yeah, know your customers still applies, right? Still important, especially in these times when you have less customers. You want to keep them coming.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you never know where things are going to go. So with demand being as volatile as it is, there's most of my clients, the vast majority, are experiencing high growth. However, with inflation and with all the concerns happening, and they don't necessarily, where they're limited on growth might be because of a supply disruption, but the ones that are more proactive are growing absolutely faster than the rest. And then that leads to a self-perpetuating what do you call that? Well, basically it makes it happen into the future, because if you're prepared and growing, you have more, like, materials and ingredients, etc., available. You can bring on additional business, whereas the people who aren't ready and are waiting for things to get better continue to wait. Business is taken away. They still have the wrong things on order, and it's like a self-perpetuating situation.
So besides investment in technology or in our workforce, we have our clients have other options of where to invest their capital. And you mentioned working with your clients' customers and even the customer's customers in order to develop resiliency. So I was hoping, Lisa, maybe you could talk about some of the choices that suppliers or providers face, such as vertically integrating some of their upstream processes, or working to absorb competitors or other parts to grow their business away from maybe their core competency.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely happening, because as we are realizing as a general rule that we lacked control during the pandemic. We lacked control in terms of the impacts of wars. So these types of situations are not improving on their own. And if we're dependent on our supply chain, we have to do one or both of the following, and we should be doing both, but that is understanding that our supply chain partners, both customers and suppliers, are really an extension of our business, because without them, we won't be successful. And in some cases, they are moving more towards vertically integrating, which, bringing manufacturing back from China could be you're outsourcing it to a supplier in China, and then you're bringing it back and partnering with somebody that you're closer to here. Or you could be maybe expanding a current facility you have in, let's say, the US or Mexico, or Australia, if you're in Australia. Or you could be, so there's a lot of options, right? Or you could be adding, is really a combination of partnerships, new ways of working together. So, like, let's say your customer has space in their warehouse, and you don't. So one of the things you can do, you can invest in too, is inventory, right? Everyone is investing in inventory right now. Hopefully they're looking at inventory not as just I need more, but they're looking at what should we be investing in to more strategic inventory or items that are critical or in short supply or those kinds of things. But they generally speaking are ordering more inventory and or more capacity. And more capacity could mean ordering additional machines, having, looking for additional people. I definitely have clients that are, expanding capacity by bringing on paint machines as an example. And they already have a paint machine, but they needed to expand capacity in that area. They're also expanding by outsourcing a part of their production. They're expanding by outsourcing the full production on certain products. So there's many ways they can expand, and the more successful clients are pursuing all of those angles. Now, does that mean that they should actually do all of those options? Well, maybe, but maybe not. So it really just depends on your situation, but they're at least exploring what they need to do to set themselves up to be able to meet their customer needs and their likely customer needs as they continue to grow, and their competition, they know in certain cases, is not keeping up. So, that's where you have to keep in touch with your customers and understand, where are your customers expanding? Where are they likely to expand? And, sometimes you have to take a little bit of a risk, which you just don't decide to expand a facility and have it done in a day. You don't actually decide to have a new partner that you bring on in a day either. You might decide you want to, but the best partners are already busy. So it takes time. So you need to be looking at these options ahead of time and working on them.
That's really interesting, Lisa. And I understand this is something you help companies with, analyzing and making these decisions, where they best act and where they best invest in what areas. We had examples here in the country where a pharmaceutical manufacturer switched to hand sanitizers temporarily, and that became their biggest selling and most profitable product for a while. I mean, these are opportunistic decisions, but they were also helping everyone because everyone needed hand sanitizers and there wasn't any around. So with every challenge comes an opportunity as well, but you're looking at short term, and what you just described is a longer term opportunity. How do you set yourself up for post-COVID recovery and what happens next, and how do you predict what the future will bring? I mean, what we heard from you is that there's not one approach that fits all, is the same for everyone, but you gave us a lot of pointers in what areas organizations should be looking and where to start to find out what they should be doing next. So there's like clusters. Is that how you see it? That you got to look at, the supply chain, you got to look at better planning, you look at your customers. You basically go through that, and then you would still make an individual recommendation that's right for a particular organization and the market that they're in.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I forgot to complete one of the examples I started with, but then I got sidetracked on giving you other examples. And so that was if let's say your customer has space and you do not, and you work out a deal with your customer, and you may actually supply other customers other than that customer, but you warehouse some product you warehouse product at your customer for additional customers that might be located near that customer. But why is it in their best interest? Well, you have to work out win-win partnerships this way and that's just one example. You also can partner with your customers to gain data into their supply chain as far as what they're selling, what new products are coming, so that you can incorporate that into your processes sooner. So to your point, Volker, yes, you would want the SIOP process, sales inventory operations planning, it's not a magical process. Each way that we implemented it a different client is different, but the concepts are the same. And it helps you to get in touch with your customer forecast, stay in sync with that, and then figure out what are all these options and how you should prioritize them. Like what's most meaningful in this case. So to your point, as we work with a client, and let's say we're working with a new client, we'll do an assessment and understand their particular objectives, because each client has a different, generally speaking, you want growth and profitability and working capital, but there's different nuances to that. So, we understand what they're really looking to achieve. And then, we say, okay, how are your people set up? How are your processes? How about your systems, technology, equipment? How does all this line up with where you need to go in order to meet these objectives? And then you can't do everything at once. So then we say, okay, which, couple of key priorities, generally speaking, like 3, but not more than that, as far as like the, at least a place to start, should we start with? And sometimes it's like you have to do one priority because everything else is dependent on it. And sometimes it's just, it's an urgent priority, but it just depends. But so we'll identify like a roadmap, and we'll start with something where you can gain a quick win within a reasonable time frame, like a 3-month. You can achieve some sort of a quick win, and then you continually refine and build the your plans going forward within that. So you're absolutely right. It sounds overwhelming because which customers are profitable? Where should I outsource? Should I bring it back in? Should I start a new facility? Well, all those are rather large decisions. So, you start with, what's going to help you get along the path most quickly, and or, with the most results, right? So you have to evaluate that situation. It's more like a return on investment scenario, but it's not black and white necessarily as far as all numbers. So that's what we do in order to get clients the clarity, because if they are trying to work on too many things at once, they'll be unsuccessful, especially since we don't really have people, as we were just saying, because of the great resignation and implementing more technology, although it might alleviate the needs for some repetitive motion kind of tasks, both on a factory floor, if you will, in the warehouse, and or just like a planner, buyer, e-commerce kind of way. But it does require some additional skills of high tech kind of skills to implement, design, those kinds of things. So we need to put all this into the mix and determine how can we proceed with something soon that will get them going in a directionally correct way with some quick wins along the way.
Great insights. Thanks for sharing that, Lisa. We usually come in at the tail end of this, once the priorities are clear and the technology has been decided, and then we'll help make it work, make it happen. And so it's exciting to see how it all hangs together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's true, because you guys come in at, when you can get to the technology and implement the technology, which is still quite critical, but that's what should go on up front. Unfortunately, some clients get carried away and just go with the latest fads or, what other people are doing, which, well, it might help them, but it actually might cost them more trouble than it's worth, because it could divert resources, being people or equipment or system capabilities that really they need somewhere else. So it's very important to make sure you're at least going in the right direction. You shouldn't go through analysis paralysis. That's really just bad, and people can get stuck going. They either go too slow or too fast, but it's hard to go the right speed fast, but not jumping to conclusions and then having to start over again.
Yeah. Fair point. I think what we've heard repeatedly, agility is very important, but it's got to be, based on an analysis, on an assessment, on data, and then hopefully making good decisions and moving in the right direction. And then it'll take some time anyway before it comes to fruition.
Yeah, exactly. And really the resiliency also kind of relates to visibility. So being able to see into your supply chain and see what's happening gives you the ability to pivot and change and hopefully, change orders as you go, or, it's more than that, but that's a simple thing that's sometimes very difficult to do, especially if it's ordered from China on the water. Who knows? You can't change something that's there.
Yeah, and take your suppliers and customers with you on the journey, as you pointed out, because you can't really do it without them.
No, yeah, you definitely cannot. I mean, you can I had a client that was really well positioned in terms of vertical integration, and he thought it was like his ticket to success, and he was number one in his industry. So I mean, he wasn't wrong, but he took control over almost the entire supply chain, and it did allow him to be very responsive to changing customer conditions. So that is another option, but it's also a pretty, it's going to take time. It's like going to take capital and resources to do such a thing. So it's by no means the only solution, and it's probably full vertical integration or fully outsourced. Neither are necessarily correct most of the time.
And Lisa, as we talk about some of these different options then that companies have for integration and for looking at their upstream and inbound processes, can you talk about the trends today about moving away from a just-in-time model and some of the impacts that might have for manufacturing?
Sure. So in a general sense, clients and companies are moving away from the pure definition of just-in-time, which is literally receiving items just in time, no matter where they're coming from, even if from overseas, which is where many companies went pre-pandemic, to just in case, if you will. So they're now they're panicking and ordering, just in case. Neither of which was really the true definition of just in time. I mean, just in time from a Toyota perspective really incorporates in, like, where is your supplier? Should you have a strategic stockpile of inventory if they're located overseas? The answer would be yes. Should you have, so the true definition of just in time really incorporates a lot of the best practices into it, but it's just not what was happening in every company that I've run across. So, from that point of view, yes, they're definitely looking at storing additional inventory, and they're also just panic buying more inventory because they can't get it, which is a problem because it's creating even further disruptions because there's only so much available, and if everybody doubles their orders, it's back to the toilet paper syndrome at the beginning of the pandemic. You can't get that much inventory. So it's just, that's again why you'd want to get control of your entire supply chain one way or another by talking to them, so that you can really implement more of a, just in time / just in case in a smart way, where you can really look at what you're storing, what you're ordering, what you're storing, where you're storing it, and what is really needed to support your changing customer environment, your changing customer requirements. Because the funny thing is that customer requirements are changing rapidly, and we are not changing what we're ordering. So just in time becomes just in case when your customers change their requirements, and we're still back in the old ages ordering what we used to order. So really we have to be smarter about what we're planning, what we're forecasting, what we're planning, and what we're scheduling, what we're purchasing. So we have to have all of those types of processes that are called many things, but planning and sales and operations planning and master scheduling. We have to become smarter about all of that in the new world. Actually another point there, Garrett, is that we also need to be smarter about what we're replenishing. And I think Volker brought up CPG before. And in the CPG world, typically speaking, you have many warehouses that supply like a Walmart or, just as an example. And so do you have the right stock in the right place at the right time is a whole different question than do you even have the right stock? So, that's another type of planning, replenishment planning. And so all of the planning pieces really should be re-examined in today's environment.
And going back to what you said about visibility earlier, Lisa, we hear that more and more, and some of our transportation management opportunities are really driven by the need for visibility. Our customers want to be able to provide, the Amazon experience to their customers, tracking and status updates of goods as they move throughout their transportation process, really as being an end goal. And then we help identify the steps in order to get to that, because there will be many prerequisite technologies and processes that have to be in place before you can get to that level of customer engagement. But it's important to start that journey. What would you say is then the risk for companies that are in this analysis paralysis phase that are looking to get started? Where is a good place to begin?
Well, I would just add that, first of all, you're absolutely right. Visibility is key. And actually, transportation planning is another one of the planning terms that I would highly recommend, especially since the prices are skyrocketing and you really need to look at what you're doing there. So where do you start if you have all of these challenges at once, I think is your question. And from that point of view, I would start with, again, like, what's the biggest objective? Is my customer changing their requirements? Is that what's driving the change? Do we have double the volume that we had last year? Is that what's the problem? So what is your overriding objective? And then do a quick, this doesn't have to take long, but a quick assessment of where you stand versus that objective. And then really that'll tell you, let's start with, pulling the data of our most profitable or unprofitable customers from a transportation perspective, just to make something up. I mean, there could be a million ways you have to go, but really the idea is, what's your overarching objective? What's the situation you're currently in? And then that's going to lead you to where to start. And then really what you do is you make it abundantly clear that all of these ideas are good, generally speaking. But there could be thousands. So we start with this one objective or two objectives or whatever it is, and we go from there. So many times, though, what I'm finding is, every answer that I'm giving you kind of says, let's start with the customer. So I guess if we had to throw an answer out there, I'd say, well, let's start with the customer and find out what is going on, because what's the point of getting our supply chain behind everything, reconfiguring our supply chain, moving our supply chain, if our customers are moving or changing or not going to be the same? So what's the worst case scenario be you move everything to where your customer is located and then you lose that customer. I mean, that sounds really awful, but I can see clients doing that. Well, I can see companies doing that, not my clients doing that.
It really puts things into perspective. I mean, we operate predominantly in the technology space and we do deliver, implement solutions, but the technology itself is never the answer in itself. Is what you do with it and how you apply it and to what problem you actually apply it. So as other smart people said, start with the problem, before you come up with a solution. So, and that's also what we're recommending, or rather than just putting technical pieces together and explaining what they can do, what's the problem that you're trying to address here? What's the overarching issue? Yeah, as you said.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And many companies seem to get stuck in that like fad idea, so they just follow fads instead of what they really need to be doing. Or they go in the opposite direction. Like there's not a happy medium many times. So they'll just be like so worried about making an investment, which is understandable because some of the investments can be significant. They'll be so worried about them, however, that they never go anywhere and they just analyze it to death. And then next thing we know, their competitor has like zoomed right on by them because they're, so slow. So you're absolutely right. You have to, look back at your problem, but you have to do it in a directionally correct way. So you don't want to put an engineer in charge of doing the analysis because they will try to get it to the nth degree of detail, which is extremely valuable in their field. But in this case, you are going to be too slow.
So lastly, Lisa, we were hoping you could comment on some of the trends that you see impacting global supply chains, and what should organizations do to prepare, say, for the near term and then for the longer term, maybe say over the next 10-year period, strategic investments that should be evaluated or begun now?
Sure. So what I see happening in terms of trends is that the strong companies and leaders are getting stronger and the weak leaders and companies are getting weaker. And you might think that's always true, and it is always true, but it's exaggerated right now because we're in a time where these fast decisions that are of high quality have to be made, and people have to have the stomach for investing in technology, investing in people. Even moving to a flexible schedule is difficult for some leaders and companies. So they have to be willing to make decisions, go with a directionally correct path forward, and to proceed. So I'm definitely seeing that as one. Another key trend I'm seeing is that successful clients are looking at implementing a tailored sales, inventory, and operations planning type of program so that they can put a process surrounding most of what I'm talking about here today, because that relates to how do you forecast your future demand, work with customers, figure out how to configure your supply chain, and then it even can relate to the how do you execute against those plans. And then the third area I would say is the planning umbrella, which could relate to, as I was saying, demand planning, production planning, replenishment planning, transportation planning, warehouse planning. So like, how are we looking across all of these functions and planning for what is going to happen? And then not just doing planning and analysis paralysis, but starting to make decisions and then utilizing that information in your SIOP process. So these concepts go together so that you can get ahead. And then the other thing I see happening is that folks are definitely reshoring and nearshoring, meaning moving production closer to the customers. They can respond more quickly and gain better control, so they can change quickly also to changing customer requirements. So they're definitely doing that, but they're not advertising it, because who would advertise it so that they get cut off from their suppliers in the meantime and can't supply their customers? So that's happening in addition to investments in technology. So that's in ERP systems, in better, further use of ERP systems. And I would consider, automation equipment, robotics, warehousing, transportation, all of those pieces to be surrounding, an ERP system. They're supplementing or complementing them from both a systems point of view and a equipment or robotics kind of, point of view, and then data. And data is a big topic. So data and predictive analytics would be another key trend. And I guess the last thing would be related to people, because you cannot forget your people, because no process, no strategy, and no system or technology is going to get you anywhere without people and the right people and the right leaders. As I can tell you, even as a consultant, I work with some clients that they just make you feel like you want to help them and you want them to succeed, and you're just more motivated. As a consultant, you help every client and make sure that you deliver the results that you've committed to delivering. But you can be more engaged in the clients that treat people, including partners, in a better way, in a more engaging way. It's just funny because recently we've been talking about this topic, because some folks just, they mean well, but they're just not as engaging to work with. So you find that people gravitate to the leaders and the people who make the future sound exciting, sound doable, appreciate what goes into it. And that's mainly for their employees, their supply chain partners, but also can relate to their technology and consulting partners and trusted advisors. I think the last thing, Garrett, is control. I kind of mentioned it, but I would say that people are definitely gravitating to where they can have additional control over their future in one way or another. And actually, one more thing just occurred to me, and that is with the inflationary pressures happening and the supply chain disruptions, the other trend that's happening is that people are getting ahead when it comes to pricing, analyzing which customers and products are profitable and how do they position their business for the future. Is the last area I'd say that is a trend currently.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much for speaking with us today. How can our viewers get in contact with you?
Great. Well, they can find me online at www.lma-consultinggroup.com. They also can find me on LinkedIn. So I'm unfortunately, Lisa Anderson is a rather common name. So Lisa Anderson, LMA, and you also can find me there as LMA Consulting Group Incorporated. So I'm also on Twitter, same types of handles.
Great. Well, those are all the questions that we had for you today. We hope our audience found it of value. Again, thank you, Lisa, for sharing your insights with us. We look forward to seeing your continued success and speaking with you again soon. Thank you, Volker, for co-hosting with me today and sharing your insights as well. Please look for more sessions of our Novigo Supply Chain Expert Series. And until then, be well.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.